Welcome to the Eternal format, the unofficial format where every set is legal, from the original base set to the most recent set, with a ban list to keep things balanced. To learn more about the Eternal format, check the links in the description. Up first, I'm going to be talking about Swift Flight Unfezant, which is the deck that I played in this game. This deck revolves around Unfezant's second attack, Swift Flight, which costs 2 colorless energy, does 120 damage, and allows you to flip a coin. If heads during the opponent's next turn, all damage and effects of attacks done to Unfezant are ignored. We can use this attack as early as turn 1 going second, thanks to Pidave's Emergency Evolution ability. That ability allows Pidave to search the deck for Unfezant and evolve straight away if it has 30 HP remaining or less. And since it has 50 HP to begin with, we can easily achieve that using the Stadium card Risky Ruins, which makes every non-dark Pokemon that comes into play, even from the deck, take 20 damage straight away. To help with Unfezant's coin flips, we use Trick Coin, which is a Pokemon tool card which allows the Pokemon it's attached to reflip any coins that are flipped during its attacks. So with Trick Coin attached, Swift Flight has a 75% chance to guarantee Unfezant's immunity during the opponent's next turn. Now, of course, the effects of attacks get erased when the Pokemon goes to the bench, so to prevent the opponent from just casting one of our bench Pokemon, ideally we want to have just Electrike on our bench, which has the Omega Barrier Ancient trait, which prevents any effect of the opponent's item and supporter cards done to it. Next, we're talking about Uxie Spread, which is the deck that was built and played in this game by iFly. This deck's main attack is Painful Memories, which is Uxie's attack, and puts 2 damage counters on each of the opponent's Pokemon. This deck then uses Dusknoir's ability, Sinister Hand, to move those damage counters between the opponent's Pokemon in any way you like, so manipulating which of the opponent's Pokemon gets knocked out. This deck also runs a sleep package to prevent the opponent from attacking back or putting something else in the active. It uses Marip to put the opponent's active Pokemon to sleep. It has an ability that allows you to do that if Marip is your active Pokemon. And also the Stadium card Slumbering Forest, which makes it so any Pokemon that is asleep needs to flip 2 heads instead of just 1 in order to wake up. This deck also has a couple other ways to put damage counters on the opponent's board. One of them is Horror Psychic Energy, one of them is Spell Tag. They have different flavors, but essentially they allow you to put more damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon when your Uxie gets damaged or knocked out. So, moving on now to the game, I started Unown Q, which is probably the best starter possible for my deck, given that it has a free retreat cost and it has a Poké Power, which allows it to completely remove itself from play. Whereas my opponent started with Marip, which once again has the ability that allows them to put my active Pokemon to sleep. My opponent went first, which is good for me since my deck wants to go second. They played Level Ball to get a Pokemon with 90 HP or less from the deck, and they chose Uxie, which is the main attacker. Then to Uxie they attach a Telepathic Psychic Energy, which is a very good setup card that got recently released. It provides a Psychic Energy, and when you attach it from hand to a Psychic Pokemon, you get to search your deck for up to 2 basic Psychic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. So that's what happens. They get Baltoy, which is the basic for the Draw Engine Claydol, and a second Uxie. Then they use Marip's ability, putting my Unown Q to sleep, and they pass. Fortunately, I flip heads, so Unown gets immediately back awake. So I draw for turn, and I immediately bench Electrike, which once again its role is to have the Omega Barrier Ancient trait to sit on the bench, just preventing a loss on the spot, but without having Guzma as a liability. Then I play Guzma Hala, which is a very important card for setup. It allows you to search your deck for a Stadium card, and if you discard 2 other cards from your hand, you also get to search a Pokemon Tool card and a Special Energy. And those cards are precisely what we need. So with that, I get Risky Ruins, Trick Coin, and a double Colorless Energy. I put Risky Ruins into play. With Poké Pad, I can get any Pokemon that does not have a rulebox from my deck, and I get a Pidove. Pidove gets 20 damage from the Risky Ruins, and then I can use its ability to evolve straight into Unfezant. I have the energy and the tool to power it up and give it some insurance. I retreat Unown with its free retreat, and then I use its Poké Power, which allows it to attach itself to one of my Pokemon, in this case Electrike, to reduce its retreat cost by 1, which is useful because in the event that my active somehow gets knocked out, this gives Electrike free retreat, and so it becomes not a problem to get out of the active once again when I have my next Unfezant ready. So with that, I attacked, and I unfortunately do not have the coin flips in this replay due to PTCG Sims limitations. So when I flip heads and Unfezant is immune from the effects and damage of attacks, I will denote this using the poison marker. So this P means that Unfezant is immune. It does not mean that it is poisoned. So, moving on, the damage knocks out Manip, and I get my first prize card. My opponent then plays Pow Hand Extension, which is a very interesting card, somewhat similar to Counter Catcher. It is an item card that you can play only if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, and it gives you a choice. You can either move one energy card from the opponent's active Pokemon to one of their bench Pokemon, or you can use it just like a Counter Catcher, and so use it to Gust. Now, my only bench Pokemon is immune to the effects of item cards, so it cannot be gasted. So the only real choice that my opponent has if they want to play this POW for some effect is to move an energy, in this case the double colorless energy, from my active to Electrike. However, Electrike is also immune to that effect, because, the Omega Barrier Ancient trait blocks that too. So what happens instead, and I will give links to the ruling in the comments, is that the energy gets moved off of the Unfezant, but cannot be attached to Electrike, and as a result, it gets discarded. So that's a neat little interaction that you do not say every day. So after that, they attach another telepathic psychic energy to the bench Uxie, getting Duskull, the basic Pokemon for Dusknoir, and another Baltoy. And then after that, they attack with Painful Memories, so putting 2 damage counter on each of my Pokemon. Unfezant is immune, of course, so this only puts 2 damage counters on Electrike. So my turn, I have another energy, in fact a Twin Energy, which is basically as good as a double colorless in this deck, since I do not run Pokemon V and Pokemon GX. So I can just attack once again, and once again the coin flips are kind to me because Unfezant is immune, and I get my second prize card. My opponent promotes Uxie and plays a Rescue Stretcher, choosing to put a Pokemon from their discard pile into their hand. In particular, they choose Marip. Then they ban the stadium, playing Slumbering Forest, which I discussed in the intro. Marip gets benched, a rescue board is attached to it, meaning that it can retreat for free, essentially, for 1 colorless less, and if Unown board for whatever reason gets discarded from play, it instead goes to my opponent's hand. And after this, they attack, so once again 20 damage on the Electrike. I draw for turn, and I just attack, once again flipping a heads, and knocking out the Uxie. My opponent then promotes Marip, and while I am immune from effects of attacks, I am not immune to Marip's ability, so Unfezant is now on sleep, and of course I need to flip 2 heads and not just 1 in order to wake up. And with another Rescue Stretcher, they get back a Uxie from the discard pile, which they bench immediately, and then they just pass the turn, and Unfezant does not wake up. Then I draw Cynthia Caitlin, which allows me to recover a supporter card from the discard pile to my hand, and I also have the choice of discarding another card from my hand in order to draw 3, and I do discard the Pidove to draw 3 cards. I bench Unown Q, just because Electrike is about to be knocked out, and my fear mainly is that my opponent may be able to evolve this Duskull into Dusknoir, which I already knew from before this game what it does, and so they would have been able maybe to knock out Electrike just by moving damage off of the Unfezant onto Electrike with Dusknoir, and then use some attack to knock out the Unfezant. Turns out I don't think they have an attack that can do that in this deck, but I did not know it at the time. Then I play Pokémon Communication, which allows me to choose a Pokémon from my hand and put it on top of my deck, and then search my deck for another Pokémon, or the same Pokémon if I wish, and put it into my hand. Pokémon Communication is a bit odd for this deck a priori because I do not run that many Pokémon cards, but given how Pidove's ability works, Unfezant needs to be in the deck at all times, basically. So since I have an Unfezant in my hand, I am playing Pokémon Communication in order to put it back into the deck, and then I get another Electrike, so once again just for insurance in case those two Pokémon both get knocked out, and Unown Q gets out of play in order to not have the Guzma liability. So yeah, now I have 2 Electric on the bench. And then I pass, and I still do not wake up. I could have chosen to play Risky Ruins in order to have a better chance of waking up, but I chose not to, figuring that A, Manaphy would have put me to sleep again, and B, my opponent was perhaps likely to bump my Risky Ruins with yet another stadium. So my opponent then attaches a spell tag to Uxie, which when Uxie will get knocked out from damage, will allow my opponent to put 4 damage counters on my Pokemon in any way they like. And then, since I am already asleep, they just pass. And yeah, I do not wake up. At this point, I chose to play the Risky Ruins, seeing that my opponent does not have much in their hand. Then I play VS Seeker to recover a supporter card from a discard pile into my hand, and I choose to recover Cynthia Caitlin. Now, you will notice I had no other supporter in my discard pile, but I was still able to play Cynthia and Caitlin just for the second effect, since I was able to draw cards. And I will leave a link to this ruling as well in the comments. So after this, I am unable to attack since I'm asleep, so I just pass. And once again, I do not wake up. Then my opponent attaches a Horror Psychic Energy to Uxie, and this one will put 2 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon if Uxie is damaged by an attack. Then they play a Field Blower, so they choose to get rid of both my Trick Coin and the Stadium. Then they retreat into Uxie and attack, putting 2 damage counters on each of my Pokemon. And the already damaged Electrike gets knocked out, so my opponent is able to take their first prize of the game. I draw for turn and I draw Tag Call, which is a card that's very important for setup because, like we saw on my turn 1, you want to play Guzma Hala as soon as you can. And if you don't have Guzma Hala already in your hand, you want to find it, and Tag Call is the perfect card for the job. It allows you to search your deck for up to 2 tag team cards, and usually I will get a Guzma Hala and the 1 copy of Cynthia and Caitlin with that. So anyway, I draw it, and I just pass, because I'm asleep and it doesn't make too much sense to play Tag Call now. And Unfezant is still asleep. My opponent with a Poké Pad grabs the draw engine Claydol. It's worth talking about Claydol since it's a staple of this format. It's Cosmic Power. Poké Power allows my opponent to, once during their turn, put up to 2 cards from their hand at the bottom of their deck, and then fill their hand up to 6, which is arguably the best draw engine in the format. Probably the most played. So with that Poké Power, they draw 5 cards and find a Lillie's Determination, allowing them to shuffle their hand into the deck to draw 6 cards. They find Buddy-Buddy Poffin, with which they can get up to 2 basic Pokemon, but really just 1, since they only have 1 bench spot open, with 70 HP or less from the deck, and put it onto the bench. And they play a second one as well, and they fail both searches, so just to thin their hand down. Then they bench Uxie from hand and attack once again, putting 2 damage counters on my active and 2 on the bench Electric. My active, which does finally wake up at this point. So I draw for turn, and I play Guzma Hala, mainly to get my tool back, but while I'm at it, I also get the special energy. Worth noting, my 2 stadiums are already in hand, whereas the other 2 are in the discard pile, so I did not have any stadium to get out of the deck. So with that, I attach the Trick Coin to my active, and I attack, flipping heads, so Unfezant is immune to attacks. However, I get damaged by both the spell tag and the Horror Psychic Energy, and my opponent chose to put all that damage onto my active. And yeah, I get another prize card. My opponent promotes Manaphy and draws for turn. With Claydol, they can draw a few more cards. They don't have Dusknoir in play yet, but they, in the meantime, get the stage 1 Dusknoir in play. And then they play their own Guzma Hala to get Slumbering Forest, so once again trying to lock me into sleep, a Horror Psychic Energy, and a Spell Tag. Slumbering Forest gets put into play, Marip puts my active to sleep, and once again they play Power Hand Extension to discard my Twin Energy. They attach the Horror, Psychic Energy, and the Spell Tag to the bench Uxie, retreat, and then attack, putting 2 damage counters on Electrike, which gets knocked out as a result, whereas my active is still immune from attacks, so my opponent gets surprised, but my active does not get damaged anymore. So I draw for turn, and with the Rescue Stretcher, I get back Electrike from my discard pile. And with Pokemon Communication, I once again put Unfezant back into the deck, getting an Unown Q, which as usual gets attached to Electrike, so I get my standard setup back. And then I play my Ace-Spec, Megaton Blower, which is a bit of an unorthodox choice of Ace-Spec, but it is very disruptive. It will discard all Pokemon tools and Special Energy from my opponent's Pokemon, as well as any stadium in play, which also happens to be my opponent's stadium in this case. So yeah, Unown would actually get sent to their hand because of its effect, but everything else gets discarded. So in particular, this is going to be very handy for removing this energy and also this spell tag, both because my opponent might run out of energy eventually, and because like those are tools that my opponent can use to damage me, and I am removing them from their board. So yeah, all that gets removed, and the stadium as well. And then I just pass. My opponent draws for turn. With Guzma Hala, they get another energy, which is a telepathic psychic this time, and a spell tag. They attach the telepathic to the active, getting as a result a Uxie to the bench. And they attach a spell tag to the active. With Claydol, they're able to draw a few more cards. They finally find the Dusknoir, and another Claydol to have a bigger draw engine, essentially. And then they attack, putting 2 damage counters on each of my Pokemon, because Unfezant did not attack last turn as it was asleep. So, now the situation that I'm facing is that with Dusknoir already in play, I run the very real risk of losing if I do not bench anything else. Because, like, if I flip 2 Tails, they can move 1 damage counter from Unfezant to Electrike, and then finish by board wiping me with Uxie. Plus, they have Spell Tag and just Spell Tag, actually. This is not a Horror Psychic Energy. So, yeah, I need to bench something. And I do not have any way to bench another Electrike currently. So I decide to open myself up for the Guzma liability by benching another Pidove and immediately evolving it to Unfezant, just to have the next attacker ready, which is the next best thing if you can't put another Electrike down. And I already had to attach for turn to my active, so I can't attach my other energy to Unfezant. Then I attack, and I do not flip any heads this time around, so Unfezant is vulnerable. And the 4 damage counters from Spell Tag all get put onto the benched Unfezant by my opponent, which will then be able to move them as they choose with a Sinister Hand. So yeah, my opponent promotes Marip, draws for turn, they get another Baltoy onto the bench, play a Poké Pad failing the deck search. Then with Arven, they're able to get an item card which they do not search, and a Pokemon tool, and they get a U-turn board from their deck into their hand. U-turn board gets attached to Marip. Then my opponent plays their own Ace-Spec and first stamp. So since I knocked out one of the Pokemon during my last turn, both of us shuffle our hands into the deck, and I only draw 2 cards, whereas my opponent draws 5. And only drawing 2 cards when I have no draw engine in play, because that would be a Guzma liability, is very harsh. And yeah, after that they can just draw more cards with their Claydols. And they knock out my active Pokemon by moving a damage counter from the bench Unfezant to the active one with Dusknoir. They put my new active Unfezant to sleep and move damage away from it onto the Electrike to knock it out. And attack with this Uxie in order to put 2 more counters onto Unfezant. I then draw for turn, and I play my Faba, which allows me to put Uxie's energy into the Lost Zone. And I pass and I wake up. My opponent draws for turn, they search their deck with Poké Pad, and they realize that they have no energy left. So at this point they basically cannot do anything, and they just concede the game. So Unfezant managed to win this game, and overall, after playing some other games as well, I am pretty satisfied with how this deck is working. I will comment on a couple of deck building choices that I've made. First of all, the basic counts might be a bit odd, since Pidove is the main Pokemon, and yet it's not the basic with the highest count. This is because since I've built a deck around Risky Ruins, you do not want Pidove as your starting Pokemon. And Unown Q has the highest count because it is such a great starter with free retreat. Electrike is sort of the next best starter, because if you have Buddy-Buddy Poffin in your opening hand, you will be able to get Pidove and Unown Q down. Pidove then evolves and Unown Q helps Electrike retreat, so Electrike is another great starter. And also for that reason I am considering removing the one Tranquill, which is here mainly to have a remote chance against ability lock, and substitute it with a third copy of Electrike. You may be slightly confused by the inclusion of a Manaphy, because after all, if the point of Electrike is to not have anything that is able to be a target for Guzma, then Manaphy kind of defeats the point. The problem with this deck is that you sort of lose against anything that can hit the bench for any sort of big number, like Radiant Greninja or Amazing Raikou or something like that. Unless you have Manaphy, because they will be able to knock out your benched Electrike turn after turn. And yeah, you are doing 120 damage, but that's not necessarily gonna result in a knockout every time. And you cannot just leave your bench empty, because then you are taking a 25% chance to lose on the spot, because your Unfezant is vulnerable. So in those cases, I just bench the Manaphy and hope that it doesn't get Guzma too much, and use it to protect my bench. You, of course, run the risk of starting the Manaphy, but I think with how prevalent those bench sniping decks are, this is a worthwhile sacrifice. There are, of course, other options to protect a benched Electrike. For example, I could play a Bench Shield, which is a Pokemon tool card that prevents all damage done by attacks to the Pokemon that card is attached to if the Pokemon is on the bench. The problem with Bench Shield is that then you can't attach an Unown Q, and in this deck you will often enough have to promote an Electrike when you flip to Tails on Unfezant, and then you want to retreat it, and if you can't do that without wasting an energy, then you also have to include some switching cards like Escape Rope, which is certainly doable, but I chose to just include Manaphy, which seemed simpler. But yeah, there is definitely room to explore some variation on this front as well. Other variations worth exploring are possibly changing the choice of stadium to something like Frozen City, so something that puts the 2 damage counters when you attach an energy instead of immediately when coming into play. And also you could have a completely different build around the same attack, foregoing the Electrike and instead choosing to counter Guzma by preventing the effect of the opponent's versus Seeker by having a Toad Scroll on your bench. And this would also allow you to have on your bench other things like a Draw Engine or maybe Victini to have your reflip effect not be tied to the Pokemon tool, and yeah, options like that. Before wrapping up this video, I want to draw a couple comparisons between Unfezant and another deck that used Electrike to great effect, which was Turbolite Jolteon Stall. And I say was in the past tense because this deck sort of fell off after Green's Exploration got banned. Now, this deck was definitely very strong. Justin Basil even considered it the best deck in format right before it was banned. And yeah, it is, I think, much stronger than Unfezant, mainly because it has fewer liabilities. First of all, it does not care about ability lock in the slightest, and it also does not care about Poké Power Lock, because this deck ideally gets set up turn 1 going second, just like Unfezant. And after that, like Jolteon does not have to flip coins, so you will not have to replace it with a newer one unless it gets knocked out by some effect if you can't find a big Parasol, or by some Shred or something like that. So yeah, unless your opponent is able to establish some Poké Power Lock turn 1 going first, you are not gonna care about any sort of lock that comes afterwards. And yeah, likewise, you do not care about stuff hitting your bench, even though some other builds of like Jolteon did use Bench Shield, not the example one I'm showing. Because yeah, like Jolteon does not flip coins, so you can just safely, depending on the matchup, leave your bench completely empty. And yeah, in general, my feeling is that like Jolteon had much fewer liabilities than this new Unfezant deck. Now, Unfezant is still decent, but I don't think it's nearly as strong as peak like Jolteon was. So, with that being said, thanks for watching. If you have any questions about the game or the list, feel free to comment below. Thanks again to iFly for playing this game, and I'll see you next time.